Welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release, a podcast dedicated to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians who support them. I'm your host, Gail Buhl. Sara Cole is a wildlife rehabilitator in northern Minnesota. In this episode, we caught up on her rehabilitation efforts. We had a conversation just at the very beginning of the podcast in 2021, and Sara was just beginning her journey becoming a wildlife rehabilitator. Now, she has lovely insights on raising young mammals like cottontail rabbits, snowshoe hares, and squirrels. Let's get to the conversation. Oh my gosh, Sara, I am so happy you are back. If our listeners haven't or do not recognize Sara Cole's name, I'll go back to season 1, episode 1 and 2, because we were talking to Sara about becoming a wildlife rehabilitator in the state of Minnesota. And I thought it would be a lot of fun to kind of catch up with her now. Like, what is she doing now? So Sara, welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for having me back.
I'm very excited. Now, of course, Sara and I interface in the rehab world outside of podcast recording, so I know a little bit about this. But so what have you been doing?
Yeah, it feels like it's been a long time and it's sort of COVID, post-COVID, or if we're even in post-COVID, I don't know what we are in years. So I feel like it's
Uh-huh.
been long and short, but I'm still at it. So just still doing rehab stuff and still learning all the time. I feel like maybe every year I both get better and realize how much I still don't know. So just on the on the constant
Uh-huh.
journey of continuing to learn and hopefully becoming a better practitioner all the time. So still having a
Right.
lot of fun.
As far as COVID, it's like time has no meaning anymore. That's I thoroughly
Yes,
believe that
yes.
now. Has no meaning. So yeah, you're still practicing and it's great and you're still learning. And I love that it's a journey and it's a learning journey, right? I mean, we've come from using cow's milk and egg yolk and whipped cream for things like cottontail rabbits to formulas that are actually commercially made. You know,
Yep.
we can argue good, bad, ugly, whatever, that kind of thing. But it certainly has come a long way, and we have a long way to go yet.
Yeah.
So we know that, I mean, you were really interested in cottontail rabbits when you started, but I don't think that's the only thing that you've rehabilitated.
No, so that still is the bulk of the rehab work that I do, and we get a lot of them here. It's I think one of our two most kind of encountered species in my part of the country in a rehab setting. I also rehab the snowshoe hare, baby snowshoe hares that come in. We don't get a ton of them here. I would say maybe in a given year I might get 10. So
Hmm.
interestingly, Heather, who's a rehabber up in Babbitt, which is not far from here, somehow the line is in between us because she
Uh-huh.
almost gets exclusively snowshoe hares and doesn't get many cottontails. So we're right on
Wow.
the interesting line of sort of where they live.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that line is probably shifting over time as
Right.
temperature unfortunately shifts. So I do get some snowshoe hares and I love working with them. They are still for me a challenge. And I don't tend to have as much success with them, I think simply because I don't see them as much. And they're tricky little devils too. I still maintain they are the cutest of all baby rabbits, and all baby rabbits are cute. But a baby
They are.
snowshoe hare is like a baby Ewok. It is the cutest. It is so
That's a great
cute. It is
description.
so fuzzy. And if folks don't know, they're precocial, so they're born fully furred and with their eyes open. And for that reason, they can look a lot healthier than they really are. Whereas the cottontails, are born with no fur and with their eyes closed, and you can sort of
Hmm.
see their bodies a little bit better. So if they're
Right.
doing poorly, it's a little bit more visibly obvious. Whereas the snowshoe is so puffy, it can be doing pretty badly, and it's not obvious. It can
Right.
be really underweight, but it still looks kind of puffy and
Hmm.
healthy.
Hmm.
And so they can be tricky and they have an attitude that I really love, which is they're sort of bratty. They do not,
They're sort of
um,
bratty. I
yeah,
don't know if I've ever heard a
they have
hare
little
or a rabbit.
attitudes.
They have
Like
attitude.
and so and each one is different, of course, but some of them I sort of love it when they a rabbit, obviously, kicking is a defense for a rabbit, but a baby
Yes,
rabbit doesn't have many real defenses.
right.
But sometimes they will, and once in a while I'll get a Eastern Cottontail baby who does this too, but they'll jump at you and make a little almost like a beeping sound. It's so they're sort of like, and that's their aggression, and I find it really touching because it's so feudal. I can sort of relate
So
sometimes,
feudal.
where like these sometimes I feel like that's how we are as humans. We think we are so tough and we're sort of laughable in our aggression, but the snowshoes are a little bit more like that, apt to
Hmm.
really kind of jump at you, which is sort of what they can do at that point, and sometimes will be yellers. So if you pick them up and they're unhappy about it, as they will be, especially
Uh-huh.
at first, they will really let you know by kind of yelling. And if you've never heard a baby rabbit yell, you don't really think of them as making noise, and so it's just disarming at first. And sometimes they just are really telling you they don't like being picked up. So I like their attitudes. They kind of, to me, have a little bit more of a spicy attitude.
So do you think because they're precocial, they know how to swear earlier?
Yeah,
And
maybe. I don't know.
that's what's going
I
on?
love their spicy attitude. I feel like I just relate a lot because sometimes as humans we're filled with this like indignant rage and but we can't really do much. So I feel like
Right.
that's the rabbit. They're like, "Oh, stop picking me up." But
Stop
what
picking
can
me
they
up.
really do?
Right.
But man, when you have success with a snowshoe hare, they are just to watch them. They get so big, they're so much bigger than Eastern Cottontails, even while they're still in
Hmm.
rehab, and they just grow and grow at this insane rate. It's like a different scale of rabbit to work with, and they like a different enclosure. So it's just really intriguing because I think sometimes folks think rabbits as though they're all the same, or even wild rabbits. And even the
Hmm.
two species that I get to interact with are so different. And their caging is different, and how they like to be fed is different. And so I feel real success whenever anything goes back to the wild, and I feel particular success if a snowshoe hare goes back to the wild because we just, like I said, I don't get a lot of them, and they're tricky for me still. So that's the bulk of what I do. I like to say that every year, at least once, I say I'm not going to do it because it's pretty time intensive. It doesn't really work well with my work schedule, but inevitably I will raise a really, really, really brand new squirrel or set of squirrels, like a day old.
Ah.
Somebody
Mm.
will find some like 1 day old squirrels, and our rehab center here really doesn't, they don't have overnight staff, so it's not very practical for them to take something that has to eat every 2 hours.
Right.
And so I will always say yes, and then there's kind of a predictable trajectory of the first few days of getting up every 2 hours, 24/7. I'm like,
Yep.
oh my gosh, this is so hard.
This is
You
so
think in your
insane.
mind, you hear it, you know what you're getting into, and then when it starts, you just immediately are like, oh no, this is way worse than I thought it would be. Because you would just
That's right.
immediately feel, and I've never had a human newborn, but I would imagine it's this and then some. But just the constant interruption of your sleep. And of course, they eat every 2 hours, but it takes time to feed them. So you're not getting a true 2 hours of
Oh
sleep,
no. Oh
in
no. Mm-mm.
between the
Mm-mm.
feeding. And that's
Mm-hmm.
assuming that you can fall asleep right away. And so almost immediately it starts to make you feel really insane. And oh my gosh, I love to watch a baby squirrel grow. So I will always
Yeah.
say yes. And then my husband laughs at me because, the first couple days I'm like, why did I do this? I'm never saying yes to a baby squirrel again. And he's like, you always say this. You're gonna do it again. And so the first little while there is rough, but then their feet start stretching out, and they are
Right.
just so fun to watch grow. So I'm sure every summer I say, this is, I'm not going to say yes again, but then I always say yes. So I typically have, maybe 5 to 10 baby squirrels that I'll take in at some level, because
Okay.
then of course if I have some that are a certain age and maybe others need to be matched up with
Right.
siblings or friends of that age, we can just match them. But they are really fun because you kind of they're with you for a little while, especially if they're super, super little when they come, and then you can see them grow and they're really playful, and just watching them in the cage is very fun, and introducing them to new foods is really fun. So inevitably I say yes. And frankly, if I didn't have the work life that I did, I probably would do even more. We probably talked about it before, but they're one of those species. I don't think people think a lot about them or
Hmm.
tend to value them, because in this part of the
Right.
country they're ubiquitous, and people think of them as nuisances, if anything.
Right.
But they are just the coolest animal, not only sort of what they can do, the way their joints move, and the way their little groups and how they communicate with each other, but just watching them kind of become themselves is such a cool thing. That's a cool thing with
It's,
any animal. I think
mm,
you and I were talking about that last weekend. I still feel like it's a real privilege to watch an animal become what it is, so it's
oh, totally agree.
watch it. And of course, it's
Hmm.
happening in the absence of, in my case, in the absence of other animals teaching it those things. So it's sort of this miraculous, I guess, nature, really just
Right.
expressing itself, because these squirrels in my care, I've had squirrels that were just a day old when they came to me. So they have no memory of another squirrel teaching them how to
Right.
climb or eat, and they're learning these things right in front of you. And it is so really cool. It's just a very cool honor to sort of watch that happen.
Yeah, I remember when we were talking about this last weekend, and it just blows my mind when we're talking about squirrels, and squirrels are one of my absolute favorites. When you watch them, there are some things that are totally instinctual. So tree squirrels, instinctual to bury everything, but yet they have to learn how to climb and they have to learn how to jump. And then,
Yeah.
of course, that's how you set up their cages, graduated cages, because you don't want them in too big of a cage because they could hurt themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, which is just, you think it might have been a flip, like climbing is an instinct, but burying they had to learn, but it's the opposite. So, okay, so snowshoe hares and cottontail rabbits
And
and
squirrels,
and
inevitably,
squirrels.
usually grays or reds. I have a particular affinity for the reds. I don't know why. They're so darn, I mean, they're all cute, but the reds are kind of known to be crazy. I just love the way they move, and they're real tiny, and there's something about them. But I'll fall in love with any squirrel, same.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And I haven't had any super recently, but again, happy to help with a flying squirrel. We don't
right,
get we just don't happen to get a ton of those in any given year.
right.
I've had a bit of experience with weasels and mink, not a ton. Again, they're very intensive, and that's actually how I met
Hmm.
Peggy Pop. Was reaching out to her to ask a lot of questions, because we ended up with a baby mink and
Hmm.
then a baby weasel when I was still volunteering at Wildwoods, and she was the go-to person. So I spent a lot of time
Right.
on the phone with her, asking sort of how to do everything. But the vast majority of my work is rabbits and squirrels, because I can't say no to them.
I love it. I love it. And I think that there's a commonality between the snowshoe hares and the red squirrels. They are they have
Yes, yeah,
attitude.
they're spicy.
They're
They both have kind of
spicy.
spicy attitudes, which I
They're
can
so
appreciate, because
spicy.
I too have a spicy attitude. So I feel like I understand, I get it.
Uh-huh. I was totally
But
gonna
I
say
love,
that, and just knowing
yeah,
you.
it's true. I own it. Yeah, it's true. I think and there's something to me that's really magical in, and not only watching those animals become themselves, which is a real privilege, but then I think of how they're both of all the species I work with really are thought of as common. Really, I think people
Mhm.
don't think that much about them because we're lucky enough to live in a place where we see them very frequently.
Mhm.
And yet, to me, there's sort of beauty in that as well. I think some folks get
Mhm.
really jazzed up about like rare animals, quote unquote rare animals. Um, I love being surrounded by these animals, and I love that I can go out in my backyard and I can see squirrels every single day and just
Right.
watch them,
Right.
and then know that I've had this window to see other squirrels kind of growing into themselves. It's just, to me, I love that. I love them for how common they are as well. I think they're sort of, we forget how cool
Mhm.
they are because they're around us every day. And And I love working with them. That just, I think again, lots of folks are not jazzed up by that, but I really love working with something that I can also
Right.
see. And I do, stand on my back porch every day and I watch wild squirrels. And probably some of the ones I raised, and probably maybe some of the relatives of the ones I raised, because we
Right.
have some property and I have released things on my own property.
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
watch them and it's so cool to just watch them interact with each other and interact with food and interact with the trees in our yard. And
Right.
the whole, it just feels like it all plays out. And I'm always kind of trying to study what are they doing and, how are they moving? And oh, they're
Right.
scolding each other, or, there's a nest. Or so it's like, just being able to see them in their natural element is cool as well.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, reading it in a book is one thing, but really actually seeing it and experiencing it, and like you said, going out in your backyard and just taking the time to watch
Yeah. Yeah.
and listen and everything. And not only helps you as an individual kind of enrich your own life and that kind of thing, but it also informs your rehabilitation.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
totally does. I was watching, and we have a lot of squirrels in our neighborhood. And of course, we feed the birds, but we have tray feeders out for the ground birds. But of course, it feeds the squirrels too,
Yeah.
and we're fine with
Same.
that.
Same.
And I was watching a squirrel from the kitchen window, and he was just a little upset with the other squirrel that was in the hanging feeder. And it was just fascinating to watch him go, how fast he could move his back feet up and down, up and down. He was stamping on the branch. Of course I couldn't hear it, but it was just, and I was watching him for like 5 or 10 minutes, and he'd stop and then he'd yell at other squirrel, and then he'd stamp again, and then he'd yell, and the other squirrel's like, yeah, whatever. But it was really interesting to
I love
try to
that.
figure it out. And I do too. I love it. So one of the things you mentioned is when you were doing some stuff at Wildwoods, you get a mink in or whatever, and you were, reaching out to Peggy in Wisconsin to talk about some of the mustelids, the small mustelids. And so when you kind of started rehab, how did that feel? I mean, did you feel like, okay, I know nothing and it's just like drinking from the fire hose? Or, I mean, what was that like compared to, and it might be a little hard to even think about it now because you're a couple years into it, but what was that like compared to now?
I think there will always for me be an element of wanting to know more. I'm
Hmm.
curious by nature and I'm a kind of cerebral and I like to know what the actual answer is. So there's definitely a little bit of torture for me in the wildlife rehab world, in that, as you know, it's still sort of the wild frontier of
Mm.
animal medicine. And many times, maybe all the time, there's actually no one right answer. You could get
Right.
sort of the
Hmm.
most educated folks in the country in the world together, and they still would not agree about which formula specifically. There's a number of formulas, or which caging method specifically. Now, there's a lot that we do know, about what
Right.
not to do and what best practice is. But for someone like me who really likes one particular right answer, there's, many, many times that is not possible.
Mhm.
So that can certainly be a challenge. And I've had a really good time learning, and I do every single year. So I think it probably feels a little less overwhelming, in that I know a lot of smart people and I can reach out to those people. And the summertime is always a flurry of texts and phone calls between rehabbers I know,
Mhm.
asking each other things. Can you look at this picture? Have you ever had this happen? All of those sorts of things. But I think there will always be some element of wanting to sort of go further, know more, have a better
Right.
success
Right.
rate, find the perfect formula. Does it exist? And every year,
Mhm.
you'll be on a forum where somebody's claiming that this one particular formula is, the best. And, and there's so many factors, right? It's even hard in a rehab setting to tease out. It's not a lab. So you can't, it's
Right.
really almost impossible to tease out even one factor, because every
Hmm.
animal also
Hmm.
comes to you differently. It's a
Right.
baby born earlier in the season, may
Hmm.
again be literally eating milk in the wild that would be slightly different in its composition from later in the season, and may
Hmm.
have had a
Hmm.
trauma, may not have, may be really fat, may be skinny. So, there's all these different factors and you can only account for
Right.
so many of them. But I
Right.
think for me, at least, as time has gone on, I think I'm probably more confident more apt to reach out as well to say, does this seem weird to you? Or can I just talk through this thing that is
Right.
happening? And I will be probably always frustrated at the fact that there's no one right, perfect answer for everything, but
Yeah, sorry,
it's probably
Sarah.
less overwhelming. Yeah, in that you
Sorry,
kind of
Sarah.
also know that everybody goes through that, and
Hmm.
and it's really comforting to talk to rehabbers that you know and respect and hear them say the same thing. Like, oh yes, I don't know either. I think this is what's right, or this is what's been my experience. But
Hmm. Hmm.
I think you sort of at some point there's a little bit of acceptance that you're all in the same boat and that everybody's trying to get better all the time.
Right. Right.
And then there's still a lot of heartbreak every time don't manage to keep something alive, or you don't get the
Right.
outcome that you wanted. That doesn't go away. But I
Hmm.
think if you have enough years of dealing with it, you sort of know. Again, my husband's the person who knows me the best and he sees me every day. And so inevitably there's a time in the summer, at least a couple times, where I just have some tears, at least,
Hmm.
something, it just gets to me. And I'll have a moment of being like, why am I doing this? Is this? And he'll always say, like, you always get here. This is a normal part of your experience. It's going to be fine. You're doing a
It's
lot
gonna
of
be
good.
fine.
So
Yeah.
even that kind of just knowing, okay, yup, I have a couple of days every season where I feel, really frustrated or really sad, and then life goes on, and then we go on. So I think
Sure.
even that's
Sure.
kind of handy to
Sure.
have that experience.
So I have a couple questions. So when you started, how did you figure out? I mean, you and I worked together fairly closely at the beginning, but how did you figure out like what resources to pay attention to? Because, like you said, there's so many different ways to do this job.
I feel really lucky. I feel like in this state and our neighbor state, Wisconsin, we have really good resources in terms of just all the organizations, including your organization and folks like you. I, and through working at Wildwoods, I knew, some of those folks. I've
Hmm.
gotten to know them a lot better. So I felt really lucky from the beginning that it felt like there were a relatively large amount of resources in our states,
Hmm.
and I had a group of folks I could reach out to. And so I never felt alone. I never felt like there was someone I couldn't call, always a few people that I could call and ask for
Hmm.
things.
Hmm.
And I read everything I could, and I went to visit other rehabbers. There was a rehabber working at a rehab in Wisconsin, pretty far away, but I went on like an overnight road trip to like
Oh,
hang out with her to
awesome.
ask her questions, and she was really lovely and kind, and they showed me their center. And so I search out resources, and then again, so many of them were at hand. So I don't know if
Hmm.
every state is like that, probably not, but I feel like we're really lucky in the
Hmm.
state of Minnesota, and we work really, again, we work neighbors with Wisconsin, so we know a lot of Wisconsinites. And I've always felt like I had a lot of folks I could ask about things.
Sure.
I read books and papers, but they tend to be less helpful. It's nice to see the research, what research there is. Again, there's not a ton of
Right.
research, but there are folks out there writing papers about husbandry and formula and, all of those sorts of
Hmm.
things. And
Hmm. Hmm.
so I think those things can be helpful, but there's nothing like just talking to another rehabber, or if someone will let you come to their house and see their setup. I always love that as well. I want to see what kind of, can I see your cages? Can I see your,
Right.
I always really want
Right.
to see things in real time. So that I never felt alone. And I think as time goes on, I now am like very good friends with lots of rehabbers, and Bree Klenner is one of
Hmm.
my favorite people, and just has a lot of great clinical knowledge. So every summer, we visit each other. We will sometimes take animals if the other one has to go out of town. And she's one of my go-tos for questions I might have about um, just things that come up, and so, and
Hmm.
ditto, we're often texting each other photos or videos of rabbits or a question. Or
Hmm.
so I think
Hmm.
that feels really good to me. It's always felt like it was a community of people all
Right.
working together, all really generous about
Hmm.
saying, this has been my circumstance, here's what I use, here's what I can tell you. So I've always felt really welcomed and embraced by the community. And it's a relatively small one, but probably larger than many states. I get the impression that we have a pretty
Yeah. Yeah,
baby
it is.
here.
It's a little bit larger than a lot of states and not as large as some other states. So yeah, we're kind of almost in the middle of the pack, I think, as far as number of rehabilitators. And of course, we're trying to grow that number because no
Yeah,
matter where you are, you don't have
it's
enough.
never enough.
It's
No, and
never
I'm
enough.
really touched every single season by the generosity of rehabbers. There was, gosh, it was probably 2 summers ago, maybe 3 summers ago. I was at my, as I say, sometimes laughingly, trying to do my actual job. So I was wearing, a business suit. I was in my office. And I heard a commotion from the lobby, and I heard people saying, "Is Sarah here?" And so my first thought was there's a fight or something. I don't know what's. And then sure enough, somebody comes to my office and they're like, "You have to come out." So our main my where my office is on kind of a busy street, and there were two obviously terrified baby raccoons kind of just walking up and down the street, obviously too little to be out of their nest,
Hmm.
really scared. And of course, there's a ton of people standing around and nobody's doing anything except videotaping them, right? Like it's frustrating.
Ah,
And you
uh-huh.
feel like at any minute they're going to get hit by a car. And so, once people know you're a wildlife rehabber, they assume that you just know what to do with any wild animal. And so I had nothing. I was wearing a business suit. I didn't have gloves. I didn't have a cage. I didn't have anything. So I literally, and there was a brief moment where I thought, that moment you have where you're like, is there another adult who's going to step in here?
That's
And,
right.
and it's
And you're
very
like,
clear that the answer is no. There was no
no,
other adult who
I'm
was
the
going to
adult.
step
Yeah, you're the adult
so
in the room.
I had this box in my office that we had literally dug out of an archive. It was like from the early 60s. I dumped the papers out of it. I get the box. I grab these two tiny little sweat towels. So my broad plan, which I haven't really thought through, is that I'm going to kind of toss a towel, over the head
Mhm.
of each baby, kind of pick it up and put it in the box quickly. That's the best that I'm moving,
Hmm.
things are moving
Hmm.
fast. That's as far as I can get. Try not to get bitten because I don't have any gloves.
Right.
So I go out and sure enough, relatively quickly, surprisingly, I managed to kind of corner them. And kind of put the box and I
Right.
throw one of the towels and it just totally misses and the raccoon hisses at me. It's like a bad movie. I'm thinking, okay, well, that didn't work. So
And everybody's
somehow
videotaping you while
yeah,
this
that's
is
right. It
going
probably
on.
does exist on videotape. And
Mhm.
so, but somehow I managed to get them both in the box. And then I'm trying to sort of tape up the box in a way that will allow them to breathe, but will also make sure they can't break out in my car.
Right.
And so then I get them in the car. I don't know why I put them in the back seat of the car, but I'm driving. And of course they're like scritching and scratching and they're gonna break out. So I've got like this one hand, I'm in the front seat, I'm driving. I've got
Mhm.
one hand kind of going into the back seat on top of this box. I'm like, oh my gosh, do not crash on your way to Wildwood.
Right.
So
Right.
I get to Wildwoods and they can't take the raccoons, but at least we can get them into like a better cage.
Hmm.
And then I'm calling like every rehab center in the state, and it's sort of the height of summer. So everybody is like, no, we can't take them.
Yeah,
And I'm
everybody's
like, well, I
full.
will be
Hmm.
damned. Like if these babies are not getting taken care of. Like I am like on a
Right.
mission now. They're no, they I will find somewhere.
Right.
So, I'm making all these calls and people are giving me names and someone connects me with Danny, and I call her and she's really lovely. We don't know each other.
Right.
And I'm like desperate. I'm like, can you please, take these raccoons? Like, what do you want? I'll give you anything. Like, and she was so nice. And she doesn't really live anywhere close to me. So it's like I think an hour and a half, 2-ish hours from
Right.
me. So I'm like,
Hmm.
I'm on my way. So, I drive there and she takes them and I get to see her setup, which is really lovely. And she has this entire she opens the door to this little area and it's like all these happy little baby raccoons like chittering in their cages and
Hmm. Hmm.
they all have all these like toys and enrichment. It's just lovely. Like the whole thing is lovely.
Hmm.
She's obviously a really good rehabber. This is obviously a very good space. And I was just so grateful that they were
Right.
in a place where they were going to be well taken care of. I remember I like took all the money out of my purse, right? And was like, here. And then I was like, and I'll send you, I like mailed her formula and I mailed her like a pallet of baby wipes because she said she needed so like I was just so grateful.
Right.
And I think when you're a rehabber, every time you give an animal to someone else, you're also aware of how much
How much?
labor
Hmm.
and cost you are putting on someone. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm always really grateful whenever another rehabber steps in to take something from me, whether it's short term or long term, because I'm
Right.
aware of the cost and the labor
Mm-hmm.
that I have just sort of placed on this person.
Mm-hmm.
And she
Right.
was really lovely. She cracked me up. They're in a dog, kind of a dog crate, and they were
Mm-hmm.
scared. They'd been through a lot that day, so they're kind of huddled up
Right.
together. And she just reaches her hand in and pulls one out. And I said, "Oh, will they not bite you?" And she goes, "Oh no, they bite." But she just
Oh no, they bite.
she was just like, "I'll be fine." She didn't get bitten. But
Yeah.
it was just so nice. And then she shared photos with me and they did well and they went back to the wild. But it's just such a gift, like there have been a lot of times people have bailed me out like that. Like
Right.
I really need help. Or last summer I ended up having surgery in the really early fall. And so I had to cut my season short.
Right.
And Bree Clenart really took, she stepped in, and there were people who were willing to step in and take
Mm-hmm.
things from me because I had to stop earlier than I would have in the season. And so I just always feel really grateful for that too, because, you're in charge of a living thing. I feel like when you have an animal in your
Mm-hmm.
care, its livelihood is your responsibility. And you hope that you always want it to have the best possible experience, not only getting released, but day to day. Does it have the best cage? Does it have the freshest
Right.
food? Is it having the best day to day experience? And so, whether it's, once in a while too, I'll have a business trip. I have a pretty high stakes job and I try not to travel during the summer, but sometimes it's not in my
Right.
control.
You
So
have
there
to.
will be
Mm-hmm.
times when, again, another rehabber has had to take care of things for the weekend for me. And I've done the same for other rehabbers. So it's just really nice to have a group of people that you
Right.
know and that you trust as well, because there aren't very many people that I would feel comfortable giving an animal to that has been in my care. The expectations are very high, that,
Good.
it will be well
Good.
taken care
Mm-hmm.
of and nothing will get missed. And that's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
trust too. So I feel like, it's nice to have a group of rehabbers that you trust to care for the animals in the same way that you feel like you would care for them.
Right.
That that, they're going to be well attended to, and, they're just going to have the best possible experience and
Mm-hmm.
care.
So networking definitely, I think, number one on your list of things that was a priority for you, and you've really reached out to ask questions, reach out, help each other, whether it's babysitting or, like you said, that great story about the young raccoons. Did you expect to have some of those moments that you have every summer where you're very sad because you've worked very hard on a particular animal, but you cannot save it, and it dies in care, and it just kind of hits you. Was that something that you expected? And whether it was something or not that you expected, but how do you work through that?
Yeah, in some ways, I don't know if you can expect it. I had a couple of years of Wildwoods volunteering, so getting to volunteer at another rehab center under my belt. So
Hmm.
certainly I had seen things die. That is a natural part of, wildlife rehab work. Farzad was leading Wildwoods
Hmm.
initially, and really taught me some lovely, beautiful lessons. I don't know if I was ready to learn them yet, but
Uh-huh.
he had some really lovely things to say, about our responsibility to give things good death. And I think that sometimes in an effort to try to save something, we cause more pain. I think I had had some good lessons, but I don't know if anyone can. You can certainly know that death is a part of rehab, but I think it's one of those things that I don't know that it ever, maybe it gets easier, but it never gets easy. And so I think that almost every season I feel like brings its own lessons. Things hit you differently. Sometimes certain animals hit me differently, and it may be
Right.
because something really pulled through that I thought wasn't going to, and I've been feeling so good. And other times it just something gets into your heart in an additional way. Everything gets into your
Sure.
heart. Sometimes things get in a little bit more deeply. Sometimes you're just tired. Sometimes it
Hmm.
feels like you've had a run of bad luck. Sometimes you're just frustrated because there's so many factors and you can't figure out which factor it is, and whether
Hmm.
even
Hmm.
had anything to do with you, and whether you could have done anything differently. So I think you just have to live through it. Maybe you build up a little bit of a callus, but I don't know if you can build up a callus.
Mhm.
enough to protect yourself. And I don't know if you should, even if you could, because I think there's something, I think that work calls you to be in community and maybe even in communion with living things in a
Mhm.
way that just cracks you open. And that cracking open can be both really beautiful and also really brutal, and sometimes both at the same
Right.
time.
Right.
And so I think, you know, the question becomes, how do you protect yourself enough that you will keep doing it, that you will keep opening the door, but not so much that you lose your humanity or you
Mhm.
stop, I think, feeling the real feelings of this, and so I don't, that's all really a long-winded way of saying I think it's never easy. And I think having people around that can remind you that this is typical is helpful, because it always feels very unique to me when I'm having a
Sure.
bad day.
Sure.
Like,
Oh
this
yeah.
is the worst day. It'll never get better. That's sort of how my mind works. And
Mhm.
it's helpful to have someone who knows me, who's like, you've been here before. It'll be better tomorrow. And so
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
helpful. And I think the work itself kind of calls you out of it, because in a busy season, you don't have a lot of time to sit around and be sad. That's just
Right.
true.
Yeah, you
There's a
don't.
cage
You
that needs
don't.
to be cleaned, or there's an animal that needs to be picked up, or something needs to be fed. And that kind of work, there's some real like beauty and comfort in the kind of, isn't the Buddhist saying like chop wood and carry water? Like everything can be holy, like even the
Right.
day-to-day tasks of living can be meditative or
Right.
holy, or uh, you can have communion in those moments. So there's always a lot to do. And I think, just getting on with it for me sometimes is helpful. Like, well, there's a cage to clean, or
Right.
there's someone else is
Right.
calling, and there's
Mhm.
more to do. So, but I think that that's the work itself becomes both the kind of gateway to the pain, but also the solution to the pain, right? To just keep going. And then you have a lot of really beautiful moments of letting something go,
Right.
and just run off into the wild. And
Mhm.
in particular, this past summer, I had two snowshoe hares, and I drove them all the way up to the Sax-Sim Bog because I wanted them to have this beautiful protected space. And
Right.
I let them go, and it was really lovely. They didn't look back. They were like,
See
bye.
ya. Yeah.
They had no moment
See ya.
of, they didn't have a moment with me. They just ran away. But I had a moment of just thinking, like, oh, they may never see another human being. And I hope they don't. Like, how wonderful
Right.
to, put something back into the
Mhm.
wild. So I think you take those moments, you kind of store them up, you put them in your pocket, and then you remember, oh, yeah, but I had that great moment. I had that
Right.
great, or
Right.
had that great moment every time you open the cage door and something runs out. That's a great moment. And I think you kind of store those up too for those bad days when it feels as though you'll never have another great moment, at least if you're me,
Exactly.
it kind of feels like that.
Right.
But then you will. So I think that
Right.
that helps too.
I think the other thing that's really come through to me anyway, and I certainly try, I've certainly had my share of bad days, bad moments, bad everything in rehabilitation, but the sense of gratitude.
Yes.
The gratitude that there's privilege in doing what we do, the gratitude that there, even though there's people out there that are doing very thoughtless things. There's so many people out there that are really trying to help. Just
Yes.
concentrating on the people who are what I call naughty, um, that maybe is not as strong a word as I should use, but you have to, we can always focus on the negative, always focus on the things like that, right? Why do people do these things? They never change. It's always the same. However, flip the script. And there are so many people who will go just like you, driving that 2 hours with those young raccoons to somebody who knows who can take care of them. And there are so many more of those people out there than the people who are quote unquote naughty. And I
Yes.
think that that is such a thing to focus on. It's like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, I can't focus on this. Think about how many people that you have interacted with that really helped, or how many animals that have done well and you were able to watch them go.
Yes. There's such beautiful stuff that happens. And there's a lot of beauty in just being in the dance, right?
Yes.
And I
Oh, I
think
love that. Hmm.
you become a part of it, and we're all already a part of it, but I think it's harder to think about in terms of ourselves
Right.
maybe. But
Hmm.
there you are, a part of this whether it's a circle, I don't know what it is, but I think there is some, it's a, like you said, it's a real privilege to be involved in that. And I think I, like many, like maybe everybody, or at least most people, I try to do good things in my life. I try to be, my parents raised us to be good people, and
Hmm.
this is one of the things in my life that I do that is wholly good. Some
Hmm.
things, a lot of things in life are shades of gray. They're mostly good, but
Right. Right.
this is like 100% good. It's 100% in the good column. And,
Hmm.
and I also think like no care is ever wasted. Comfort is never wasted. A good death is never wasted. If an animal
Right.
dies in my home, and it's warm and it's safe and it's not in pain,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's a good thing as well. Maybe it's not my favorite good thing, but that is its own good thing.
Right.
And so I think there is just so much good in it, and I think it changes me all the time. It has changed me. It continues to change me. Yeah, I'm a more cracked open person in terms of sort of what I see and what I feel, um, and the ways I try to be in the world. I've given a lot of people lectures when they say mean things about squirrels. No, I mean, sometimes I just, I can't,
Yay, Sarah.
I just, I think it changes us for the better, and maybe it makes us more human. I think being human hurts, right? Like
Hmm.
but I think it is a good thing to be more human, even though it's not
Hmm.
an easier thing, maybe. But I think
Right. Right.
when we become more human and we realize how connected we are, that's almost a platitude. People say it so much, but
Hmm.
I think doing this work, you really see how connected we all are. And certainly the work has made me think more than I ever have, maybe about death, about my own death, about like the death of people I love,
Hmm.
because we are also animals. So I think that just,
Hmm.
it is so many different things. And it's one of my favorite things about myself.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the work that I've been able to do. And not all of it has been easy, like you said, and there's certainly been a lot of death and everything, but I agree. If the animal is not in pain and is warm and all of those, and not of as little fear as possible, those kinds of things, there is such a thing as a good death. So are there things you wished you would have done at the beginning that kind of like looking back, if you could tell your younger self? And then I'm going to ask you what advice you're going to give to new rehabilitators too, because you're 2 years ahead of a lot of new folks.
I, this is a hard one because I feel like I'm still learning it. I still feel like often I've erred on the side of not euthanizing quickly enough. That's probably a
Yeah,
common mistake,
it is common.
thinking
Hmm.
that, oh, I can save this, I can try this thing, I can try this thing, I can try this other thing. And, working from a kind of a place of desperate hope that, I'm going to be able to turn something around for an animal. I'm better now than I used to be at not doing that. But again, I think I unintentionally prolonged suffering for animals that
Sure,
I shouldn't have,
sure.
in the hope that I would turn things around, or in my refusal to admit that I couldn't. Um, I'm still working on that one.
Hmm.
It's a little easier to say in your head than to when it's in real time, to make that call. That's still something I'm working on. I think sometimes, learning as much as you can, and also sometimes learning to trust your own instinct is
Mm.
uh
Hmm.
it's hard, because at first, of course, when as you're developing new skill, I think you are also developing instinct, because instinct relies on, I think, a lot of patterning, right? So a lot of times
Sure.
when we say we have an instinct, it's because we've gone through something enough times that what we say is instinct is really knowledge of how things typically go.
Right.
Uh,
And you recognize it maybe even sooner than
sure.
you
And
would have
so,
at the beginning.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think,
Mhm.
you can trust that more and more the more you know and the more experience you have. If you've had 600 or 800 or 2000 experiences, what you might call instinct, you have a lot of sort of lived experience. So
Right.
I think there's a beautiful tension between learning, wanting to learn all the time and continuing to learn, and also trusting what you may feel like is an inner voice, but really is tapping into all this other knowledge that you have and you may call instinct. And so I think sometimes that can be a really valuable thing too, whether it's,
Right.
this animal is ready to step down its feeds, or this animal's ready to go into a bigger cage, or these seem like
Mm-hmm.
small things, but they're the things that consume me. In the summer, you've never seen
Sure.
angst like the angst I have when, somebody goes from 2 hours to 3 hours for a feed, and I'm like, was it too soon? Are they starving? I'm literally like, really worried. Or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, with rabbits, there's this, they have moments, right? They go from 2 feeds a day to 1 feed a day,
Right.
and they're eating on their own. But there's sort of this like leap of faith as you remove there was a day that you remove that 1 feed,
Right.
and you don't they're little, they have a lot of margin for error, so you don't want them to lose weight. And so I spend a lot of time angsting over that day. Are they eating? I'm looking in the cage. Are they I'm weighing them, of course, every day. Do they lose
Uh-huh.
weight? Are they eating on their own? So
Right.
they seem like little decisions, but there's so much instinct involved, I think, in every case, or learning, or
Mm-hmm.
relying on your own learning. And no two animals are the same, and no 2 seasons are the same, and no 2 weeks are the same. So what works for this animal may not work for this animal or with this group of animals. So I think
Right.
just, if folks can both keep learning, but also I think if hopefully I trust my own instinct or my own knowledge a little bit more all the
Right.
time too.
Right.
Because I think I've overthought things, and I've probably caused myself a lot of needless angst, really overthinking things. That's
Overthinking.
in my whole life. So
Yeah,
also in this
but I think that that's also a lot of rehabilitators do the same thing. And because, like you mentioned earlier, I mean, we are responsible for this life. And
yes.
so we want to get it right. So, what advice would you give any other new rehabilitators out there that might be listening to this?
I think reaching out, I think other rehabbers are our greatest resource, and
Hmm.
so folks should reach out and ask questions. And I've even called folks and introduced myself and
Hmm.
gone to their centers. And my experience has been that everybody's really generous and really willing to share what they know and what they've learned. And so I think you can't reach out enough. You can't nurture those relationships enough, because
Hmm.
they're so vital. And we are a little network in our state, and
Hmm.
we do rely on each other. Sometimes I say about my CEO life, I never have said help or thank you as much as I have since I became a CEO, but the same is true for being a rehabber. I think I ask
Wow.
for help more, and I probably also say thank you more.
Hmm.
Um, for the generosity that people have shown in answering a question, letting me come visit them, giving me their formula recipe, whatever it is. I
Right.
think
Right.
a lot of generosity there. And then I think, really people you have to just kind of crack wide open. You just have to let yourself fall in love, and you have to let your heart get broken too. Like
Right.
you have to sort of
Right.
go in and not hold back. I think this work has really made me more human. It's made me more alive. It's broken my heart a lot of times. It'll break my heart a lot more times, but oh my gosh, it has given me some of the most precious kind of holy moments that I've ever experienced, and just I think if you could just go in, you have to go in with your whole self. And I don't think there's any other way to do it. I don't think you can do it a little bit. I think you have to just lean in and take all the parts of it, and realize, as you said, that it is good. It is good work, and it's the pursuit of good work, even when it doesn't
Hmm.
end well. There's something really lovely and beautiful about the pursuit of trying to be a kind of citizen in the world, trying to be an animal in the world,
Hmm.
working in concert with other animals, because as humans, we so often are antagonistic to other living things,
Right.
whether
Right.
because we're driving cars, or we're not being thoughtful about the resources we're using, or there are people who are actively cruel. But I think there's, the other side of that is this ability to be in community with
Right.
these animals who are in some ways very like us and in some ways completely different. And it's a little bit like learning a second or third or fourth or 10th language. Like we will understand a little bit and never be native speakers, but to just be here together is a sort of really brutal miracle of some kind.
I couldn't have ended this any better. That's amazing. And I hope everybody like rewinds a little bit and listens to this very end again, because it was beautifully said. Beautifully said. Sara, thank you for updating us and on this journey, this wonderful wild journey that is wildlife rehabilitation.
Well, thanks for letting me
So
talk about one of my very favorite things. It's always every time the season ends, I feel relief for like a week and then I get sleep and I finish all my laundry and then I start missing animals almost immediately. So I'm in the part of the year right now where I'm like, I miss them. Will they ever be back? And then
oh yeah, they
come back
will.
like a wrecking ball, just all at once.
That's
But
right. That's right.
right now I'm in the missing them stage, so it's always a gift to be with you and to just be able to talk about this because for folks who do this work, I think we're our own community too, and
Mm-hmm.
we kind of understand each other in a way that is pretty awesome.
Totally agree. Oh my gosh, Sara, thank you so much again. I cannot thank Sara Cole enough for such a wonderful conversation. Lots of call outs to other rehabilitators and wildlife centers throughout the episode. And this reminds me how we are so much better off for our wildlife when we work together. Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release is a production of Partners for Wildlife, working hand in hand with wildlife rehabilitators and veterinarians to improve the welfare of orphaned, ill, and injured wildlife. Our executive producer is me, Gail Buhl. I'm the Partnership Coordinator for Partners for Wildlife at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine's Raptor Center. To learn more about the Raptor Center and Partners for Wildlife, visit theraptorcenter.umn.edu. Our producer is Reese Rosato. Special thanks to our guest Sara Cole, Partners for Wildlife, and the Raptor Center. That's our show. I hope you join us again.